It's a new term and a new beginning for Warwick. My name is Yaena Kwon and welcome to a special feature on Warwick TV. Paris and its luring powerful artists inspired a young man from Colombia to leave his country in order to become a writer. At the age of 23, Juan Gabriel Vásquez began his studies at the prestigious Sorbonne. Today, 14 years later, he is one of the most eminent writers from Colombia. His first novel, The Informers, has been a huge success. It draws on hidden corners of history, on the experiences of German immigrants in Colombia during the Second World War. In 1941, the so-called blacklists with names of suspected Nazi sympathizers were created, drawn up by the US government to fight against the Axis in Latin America. Some people collaborated with the government and became informers. In other words, they provided officials with information and names about potential Nazis who then got onto the list and in the end were imprisoned. The problem was that people started falsely accusing immigrants so that anti-fascist refugees were put together with real Nazis. One of these informers was the father of the novel's protagonist, and the protagonist is the journalist Gabriel Santoro, who investigates his father's past. I'm very glad that I could meet Juan Gabriel Vásquez here on Warwick campus. And of course, we talked about his first novel, A Story of Betrayal and Atonement. So, Juan, your first novel, The Informers, was published in 2004 and 2008 in the English language, translated by Anne McLean, and you're going to talk about it with students here at Warwick. I would say it's actually a pretty dark novel, isn't it? It's about German exiles in Colombia. And I was wondering, how did you, as a Colombian author, come up with the idea to write about Nazi influence, this time not in Europe, but in Latin America?
Yeah, well, you know, the thing is I don't usually come up with ideas. The process is more concrete than that in my case. I don't choose subjects that seem interesting to me or whatever. This came in the form of a conversation I had, a casual conversation with this German lady, German-Jewish immigrant who came to Colombia in 1938, and who told me how her father, a Jewish escapee, such as herself, obviously, had almost been imprisoned in this camp for enemy citizens in Colombia because he was German. So he had fled Hitler, taken refuge in Colombia, and then persecuted because he had a German passport, and Colombia had declared war on the Axis. So that paradoxical situation, I think, just begged me to look at it as a novelist. I started asking questions, interviewing people, and finding out how the government, the Colombian government, through an alliance with the United States, tried to do the right thing in controlling Nazi propagandists, Nazi sympathizers in Colombia at the time, and ended up, you know, committing certain injustices with innocent German citizens who were in Colombia at the time. Of course, it's much more morally complex than that, but that's the backbone of the situation.
Okay. What comes across very well in your novel, I guess, is the high sensitivity of the subject. Right at the beginning of the novel, the protagonist, Gabriel Santoro, he just published his book on the blacklists, which is a huge topic in your novel.
Yes. And
he's confronted with his father, who accuses him of having done harm to people trying to forget about this dark memory in their life. How was it for you when you did the research on the novel?
Well, I found out astonishingly that not many people knew about this, and that the few who had witnessed directly these things just plainly refused to talk to me about them. They didn't want these things dug up. They didn't want to remember things they had worked hard to forget. And the interesting thing is that it was really hard to do my research in that way. But when the novel was published, the same people who had refused refused to talk to me, came to me and asked me, "Are you writing the Informers 2 or 3 or 4? Because you know, I have a life to tell you too," in the way that this lady told me her life. So the book, in a way, broke a taboo in a certain section of Colombian society. It didn't produce the public debate I was hoping for, because Colombia has a very pressing daily agenda of problems to solve, but it did produce private debates, and it did break private taboos in the German families and the descendants of these German families, so that was a great satisfaction for me.
You just told me that you presented the novel in Germany as well. How did you perceive the reaction among Germans?
I was really nervous, because after all, this is a novel that deals in very complex moral issues. It doesn't deal in clear black and white things. No, you know, no novel worth its salt does that. And I met a very nice, favorable reaction, both from Germans who were interested in people keeping the subject alive, who were interested in people discussing how this horrible thing that happened didn't happen only in Europe. It had consequences all over the world. And I also met Germans who had lived in Colombia and had known this firsthand. I met their sons, their daughters, who remembered these subjects being discussed in their families, but never had actually gone deeper into that. So I think the novel had a very good reception in this way, which is, you know, the contact with readers, what readers think, is what ultimately is interesting for me.
The conversation is going on.
Yes.